welcome back. I'm Connie from Let's Go Crafting. Today we are going to take a little bit of a segue, and instead of just making a fun craft, we're going to make something to help our community. As you know, we are all sheltering in place because of COVID-19, and I have heard from many different sources that our health providers are running out of face masks. So I have done some research online, and I was sent several different patterns, and this is the pattern we're going to use for a face mask. So this is our face mask, and it goes on just like this. See? It covers our mouth and our nose, and it's not as good as the N95s, but these are pretty good. And I have several people who are going to help me to deliver these where they need to go. So let's get started. I'll be back in just a second with all our supplies. This is what you will need. We will need a piece of cardboard for our pattern, because you might possibly want to make more than one. My cardboard usually comes from cereal boxes or snack boxes or anything like that. I'm a big recycler, a big reuser. You'll need your paper scissors. You will need your fabric scissors. You will need something to measure with, and I think I've already said in one of my other videos, this is my favorite measuring tool. This is my ruler from when I was in elementary school. So you'll need a pencil, and you'll need fabric. You'll need two different kinds. You can use the same color if you want. It should be cotton, so don't feel like you have to go out and buy anything. You can use sheets, pillowcases, an old shirt that doesn't fit, like a men's button-down shirt, not a t-shirt, but kind of a woven cotton. You can use anything you really want. I'm trying to make the ones that I make pretty and attractive, because I think, they might like that. They're working hard, these people. I'm going to sew mine on the sewing machine. You do not need a sewing machine. You can have a needle and thread. I've been asked to do a closer video on how to sew by hand, so I'm going to start, after we make our pattern, I'm going to start with a little tutorial on how to sew by hand. Well, let's get started with our pattern. I forgot one item you will need. You will need 2 pieces of 1/4 inch elastic, and they're 7 inches long. So I'm going to set those aside right now, but we do need those. Right now we're going to make our pattern, and the pattern for an adult mask is 9 inches by 6 inches. I'm just going to start measuring here, and I'm going to go from this to the 9-inch mark and make a mark. And then I'm going to make another mark at 9 inches here, just so that I have 2 points of reference when I try to draw my straight line. Okay, but I really only need 6 inches because it's 9 inches by 6 inches. So now I'm going to make a mark at 6 inches and another reference mark at 6 inches again. And now I can draw my straight line by lining it up on those marks. Pretty straight. Remember, nothing has to be perfect. You do the best that you can do, and that will be fantastic. Okay, now we're going to cut with our paper scissors. We're just going to cut our pattern. And I'm just cutting along my line. And here's my rectangle for my face mask. The easiest way to cut fabric that you want the same size is to lay them one on top of the other. I like to lay them right sides together because then it's all good to go when I'm ready to sew. If you have a paper pattern, you would, where's my pencil? Here it is. If you had a paper pattern, you would pin the pattern onto the fabric. But I have a cardboard pattern, and I've got my fabrics right sides together. So that's the darker side is usually the outside of your fabric, and you want to put those right sides together. Flatten it a little bit. I'm just going to lay my pattern on here, and to save myself time, I've got a straight line of fabric here and a straight line there. I'm just going to put my pattern up against those two lines, and then I really only have to trace two lines. And you can see them there on my fabric. And now I'm going to cut out my fabric. And I'm just cutting directly on my lines. I'm not worrying too much about it. And now we're ready to sew. So when I'm sewing on the sewing machine, I like to pin my fabric. I pin my fabric so that it doesn't slide and go out of place. And I stick my pin in close to the edge, and then I kind of bend it over so it comes out on the same side. And I like my ball to be facing out. And I'm just going to line these up. And I'm just going to make sure my fabrics are even on all sides. I'm just going to put 2 pins on each side. This is also a small project, so you don't need a ton of pins. And as you're sewing around, you will have to take them out anyway. I'm just flattening everything to make sure it's completely flat. So my pinning on this is done. I have 2 on each side. I'm going to go to the sewing machine in a minute to sew, but first I want to do just a refresher on how to sew by hand. As I've said, every single item that you make can be sewn by hand. Sewing machines have not been around all that long. How I would sew this together would be a small running stitch. You can also do the back stitch. I will demonstrate both, but I need my glasses. So on they go. To measure out, for me, the perfect length of thread, I grab the end of the thread in my fingers, I pull my arm out, and I measure to my shoulder. This is where I'm going to cut my thread. I almost always sew with thread that is doubled in length. I like that. To thread your needle has to be sharp, and it has to have an eye that is big enough to get your thread through. So let's see if I can do this. I've got my glasses. It should be easy. There we go. It went through. So as I said, when I sew, I like to sew with my thread doubled, especially if I'm going to use it as in something like this where I'm really holding 2 pieces of fabric together. So I bring my ends together and I line them up. I make them even, just like that. Like that. And then I grab them and I wrap the thread around my finger and I overlap it so that I have the thread that's going to my needle on top of my ends. So you kind of look like that. You have an X. And then you just roll it right off your finger, grab your threads, and pull down. And there you have a nice, neat knot close to the end of your tails. Okay? Now I'm going to start sewing. I'm going to do the running stitch first. The running stitch is called a running stitch because you're loping along. So you do a stitch, and then you have a gap, and then you do another stitch, and you have a gap, and you do a stitch. So it's like loping along, like that. So pretend that this is our mask, and you're going to come up from the back and pull your thread. And you want to make your stitches pretty small. And then you're going to take your needle and go back into the fabric. Pull it straight so you have a stitch that looks like that. That's almost too big. Remember, your stitches are going to leave a little bit of a gap in between them. See where your thread has come up and then down. And this is a gap where there's nothing. So you really want to make that gap as small as possible. So running stitch, you take another stitch coming up, leaving a gap, and then you take another stitch going down. Okay? And let's do it one more time. Uh-oh, I have a little, I'm glad this happened. This happens a lot to you. So I have a little something that looks like that. All that means is one of your threads has pulled tighter than the other. So you just take a tug, oh, wrong thread. Remember, you have two of them, and you pull the other one, and it comes flat. So I'm glad that happened. Now I'm going to come up again. Next to it, and go right down. Now this is called the running stitch. If you get a little bit of a knot, just gently unpull it, and there you go. It comes right back to where you want it to be. This is called a running stitch. So it's like loping along. So you lope, and then you lope, and then you lope. It's kind of like jogging along. The back stitch is slightly different. In the back stitch, you won't have any of these gaps. Okay? So it started, we're going to start the back stitch over here. It starts out exactly the same as the running stitch. So you come up from the back of your fabric. You come to the left just a little bit. Pull your thread down. Come up again to the left. So now we're still exactly the same as the running stitch. Now, this is where it's different. Instead of moving along like I'm loping, I'm going to come back. So if you notice, this stitch it goes down again right there. So I came up here. I'm going to go down right into the same hole as the previous stitch. And then I'm going to pull it. Okay. Then I'm going to come up next to it. And I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to go back to the previous stitch and go into that hole. And now you can see the difference between a back stitch that gives you a solid line and a running stitch that gives you a dotted line. Either one works in this case. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you have little stitches, so you have little gaps, so there's no real holes in your end product. All right, I shall be back at the sewing machine in just a second. Here we are at the sewing machine. We are going to start a little bit past the halfway mark. We're going to stop. We're going to sew all the way around, and I'm going to mark my stopping point with 2 pins. I need to leave a space that's not going to be sewn because I actually have to turn my mask right side out. If you're sewing by hand, the process is exactly the same way. You're going to start on one long side, a little past the halfway mark. So you set your fabric on the sewing machine. I'm lining mine up with the edge of my presser foot on my machine. That's about 1/4 of an inch. This project is sewn at about 1/4 of an inch, but honestly, if it's kind of close and almost, that will be just fine. I'm going to take my first pin out. I do not sew over my pins. Now, if you were sewing this by hand, you already have the knot taken care of. For us that are sewing on the sewing machine, we're going to do our knot now. So we sew forward a couple stitches, we stop, and then we go backwards a couple stitches, and now we stop, and now we continue on forward. And that is how we do our knot on the sewing machine. Now when you get a little bit away from your edge where you're going to turn, it's time to start putting your elastic inside. So we're going to take this pin out. I'm going to grab one of my pieces of elastic and I'm going to set it inside my mask. So I'm just going to kind of push this in here a little bit. What I want is I want this end edge of the elastic to be right in the corner of the fabric. So it's going to line up on the corner like that. So just directly across my corner. I'm going to push this out of my way. Now that it's lined up in the right spot, I'm going to put my other fabric down on top, and I'm going to continue sewing. And I can tell you'll hear it when it goes through the elastic. There's a little more resistance. To turn and make sure that I'm still at 1/4 of an inch on this seam, I stick the needle into the fabric, lift my presser foot, and then I rotate my fabric. Now, I can see that I'm a little farther away from the edge of the fabric, so I'm just going to lift my presser foot again, rotate my fabric back, and put my presser foot down. Now, I'm not going to sew this with the foot pedal. That's where I press down on the foot pedal and it keeps going. I'm going to use the knob on the side of my sewing machine. I'm going to turn the knob towards me and just take one stitch that way. When my needle is back in, I lift my presser foot, turn my fabric, and now I'm good to go. I'm exactly where I want to be. As I'm sewing this seam, I just want to make sure, I'm going to unpin this, that this elastic is out of the way a little bit. Okay, because I don't want to sew my elastic here. I want my elastic in the corners. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to hold my fabric so that it's still lined up. And now when I get almost to the end, I've got quite a bit left and I need that. I'm going to reach in here. Maybe I have to undo this one. I'm going to reach in here and grab my elastic. Can you see your elastic hiding in there? You're going to grab that elastic. You're going to just double check that it hasn't twisted. And then you're going to take that same piece of elastic and now put it in this corner the same way. So it's lined up like that. Then you're going to put your top fabric on top and you're just going to continue on. I'm going to get to my corner. I'm going to turn, I'm slightly away, I'm going to turn back, and I'm going to sew with the sewing machine by hand, turning the knob. I'm going to turn back, and there I am. I'm right at the right spot. And now I'm going to sew across the next long seam. Now I'm almost at my corner again, and I have another piece of elastic to put in. So I have to take out this pin because I'm going to sew farther that way. And I have to take out this pin because otherwise I can't get the elastic in there. I'm taking it out. Now I have my second piece of elastic. I'm going to put it inside my mask. And I'm going to line up my end right, just like the other side. So it's just like that. I'm going to push this long piece out of the way because I really want it. I don't want to, sew over it so that it makes a big bunch up. Then I put the top fabric back down and I sew over to the corner just like we did the last couple times. And let's see if I get it right this time. Needles in, lift my presser foot, rotate my fabric. Oh, this time I'm right in the right spot. That always feels good. Now I'm going to make sure that my elastic is pushed out of the way until I want it back. And I'm going to keep sewing. Okay, now I'm almost at this corner. So I'm going to take this pin out and I'm going to look inside for my elastic that's hiding, and here it is. Then I'm just going to make sure it's not twisted. This piece of elastic, this side of our elastic goes on exactly the same way, like that. Bring your other fabric over the top of it. Line up your fabrics, of course. And sew. And we come to the end. And now let's turn. Woo, I did it again. Woo, doesn't always happen. When it does, it's great. So now I see my 2 pins, okay? I'm only gonna sew to these 2 pins and then I'm gonna backstitch. So let's go. Take out my pins, do my backstitch, do my front stitch, and there I am. I have not sewn in between here. This is where I'm turning my mask right side out. So now I'm taking my mask off of the sewing machine. I will meet you over at the ironing board. Time to iron. All right, so to turn it right side out, we open up our mask, and I always just stick 2 fingers in here, and I go to one of the farthest places from the opening, and I grab it, and I pull it through my opening, and then I put my fingers in again, and I grab the other far side, and I turn it, then it basically turns itself right side out. So my corners are always a problem. They don't want to come out. So I take a finger and I push them out to get them all the way out. If your corner is still being stubborn, you can use part of a chopstick, the end of a pencil. If your index finger isn't working, your pinky finger is a little smaller, and you just use that to push out your corner so you get a nice, neat corner. There we go. So now we get to iron this thing flat. When we iron it, here's your opening. You want to make sure that the edges are bent in, almost like it's continuing the seam. That's really exactly what you're doing. The reason you don't want these raw edges hanging out is see how they tend to get a little frayed and, fabric sticking out, little threads sticking out. That part we like to hide. It just looks more neat. So we fold it in, move these off the way. And then we're just going to iron our mask flat. And we are almost done here. As I go around ironing it flat, you'll notice that you have some little extra fabric, you want to bring your seam to the very top so you don't have an extra fold. And then iron it. Give it a nice press. Irons are great things. They're super hot. The only place we hold our iron is on the handle. This is your faceplate. This is super hot and we never want to touch it. When we're done ironing, even just one seam, we always stand our iron back up on its foot. And irons have a foot. That's what lets it stand nice and safe. All right, let's do the next side. This side you can really tell that the seam is not at the top, so you can separate out the fabric and pull up your seam so it's at the top. And then you just iron. And this one looks pretty good, so I'm going to iron that. Okay. Now, before we do our last bit of top stitching, we have to put in something called tucks. The tucks are these little folds, and that's what allows your mask to shape your face just a little bit better. See how it's curved more than this, which is just flat? The tucks on each side are what allows that to happen. All right, I will meet you at the sewing table. Okay, so I'm back at the table, and we are now going to pin so that we can put our tucks in the side so that these masks will better fit a person's face. I have gone ahead and put a pin where my opening was so that I can hold it together for when I'm ready to sew. Okay? So tucks are really simple. I'm going to use a ruler, but you can eyeball it if you want. The big thing is that when you're folding to make your tucks, all the folds go the same way. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure 1 inch up. So here's the inch mark. I'm going to bend my fabric at the inch mark and I'm going to fold it up so that I have a little fold that looks like that. Now the fold should be about 1/4 of an inch. So can you see how the fold is about 1/4 of an inch long? That's about what it should look like. If it's slightly different, it's not a big deal. So I did the bottom fold, the bottom tuck, and I'm pinning it, okay? Now I'm going to do the top one. There's 3 on each side, but now I'm going to do the top one. And for the top one, I'm going to measure down 1.5 inches. The reason for that is once I make my fold and I fold it, making sure that's 1/4 of an inch, yep. Now I'm about the same distance, 1 inch from each side. I'm going to pin that. And now I'm just going to eyeball. There's about the center of what's left. And I'm going to come down just a little bit and grab it and fold it. And now I have my 3rd tuck. They're all approximately 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to pin it. If you notice, all of the folds are going in the same direction. So my folds are all going facing the upward direction. Now I'm going to do the same on the other side, and then I'll meet you back at the sewing machine. So now we're back at the sewing machine. These are the tucks that we did together. And then these are on the other side. These are the ones I did quickly. We went away and did them separately. If you notice, the folds are all up on this side and they're all facing up on this side. That's the only tricky part. They should all be the same. This is my opening. Now I'm going to sew around the whole mask twice. And instead of sewing at 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to sew closer to the edge. So 1/4 of an inch would be if my fabric was way out here. If my fabric was resting on the edge of my presser foot. And right now, my needle sews right here in this gap. Sews right there. So I'm in the middle of my presser foot. I'm kind of in the middle of this half. And that's where I'm going to sew. If you're sewing by hand, you will start in the same place, and you will start from the back so that your knot is on the back. And then you'll either do a small running stitch or a back stitch all the way around. And it's exactly the same process. So I'm going to do by machine. I'm going to go forward a little bit, backward a little bit, forward a little bit to do my knot. And then I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to come to my corner, and I'm going to treat this corner the same exact way I treated it when I was sewing the first time I sewed around the rectangle. I'm going to come to the corner, leave my needle in, lift my presser foot, and turn. And hopefully I wind up in about the same place so I can just sew. You really don't want to sew over your pins. Several things can happen. One of them is nothing, which is the best outcome. The next thing that can happen is you will hit the pin, and either the pin or your needle will break. And that's also okay, because if your pin breaks, you can throw it away. Same with the needle, and you just replace it. The third thing that happens very infrequently is unpleasant, and that is when neither the needle nor the pin break, and then it shoves your needle up into your machine, and that is not something I can fix. I have to bring it to the shop to be fixed, so I never want to do that. So I always take my pins out as I'm sewing. All right, I'm going to come back when I've gotten all the way around to here to tell you the next step. Okay, so I've gone all the way around once. You can see I'm right back here at the start where my starting threads are. To reinforce this mask so it can be used over and over and over and over again without getting any holes in it or anything like that, we're going to sew again all the way around as close to being on top of our previous seam as we can. Okay? I will be back as soon as I've done that. Here I am, back again. I've now gone around 2 times. I'm back at my starting point. I'm going to do my back stitch, my forward stitch. There's my knot on the sewing machine. If you are sewing along by hand, you will just make a knot at the end of your thread. And then we take it off of the machine, and I trim my threads, and our mask is complete. So if you're making these to donate, I will have a box out front of my house that we can place them in. And then we will deliver them where they need to go. We will deliver them. Hang on just a second and I'll show you where that box is. Hi, so now we're outside my house. Let's Go Crafting Studio. If you're making these and you'd like to donate them, I would love to deliver them for you. You can make as many or as few as you want. Put them in a Ziploc baggie, and I'll show you where to place them. Here's my beautiful Let's Go Crafting sign. So you come up to the gate. You can just open the gate. Come on in to our courtyard. And there's a box here that says face masks. You can just open the box, put your masks in, and close the box. Thank you so much.